Hello, everyone. I am Aydoğan Vatandaş, the editor-in-chief of Politurco.com. Today, we have a remarkable guest, Dr. Craig Considine, and he is the author of the book titled The Humanity of Muhammad. So, Dr. Considine is an Irish-Italian-American scholar of Islam, author, and a faculty member of the Department of Sociology at Rice University. He also has experience in filmmaking, having directed the documentary film Journey into America. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Considine.
And thank you, Professor Aydoğan.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
I also have three genius students of mine who were really interested in your book. They wanted to join this interview, and right now we are together and we are going to ask the questions about your most recent book. So, sir, as far as I understand, you used a very interesting scale to evaluate, to measure the humanity of Prophet Muhammad. So can you please tell us this tool? Can you please tell us about this tool and how it helped you to measure the humanity of Prophet Muhammad?
So, in previous lectures, I've actually used the word IWAH. It's an acronym, IWAH, and I believe it stands for Identification with All of Humanity. I didn't necessarily talk about that in the book, but I've done it elsewhere, but on just a few occasions. The book basically frames Muhammad's approach to humanity through sociological concepts like religious pluralism, civic nation building, anti-racism, women's rights, a love for knowledge, and the golden rule. And I break down each of these sociological concepts and kind of differentiate them from other ideas. And ultimately, I'm framing Prophet Muhammad as someone engaging in a old Hebrew phrase, which is called tikkun olam. Again, this isn't in the book. I wish it was, but I'm talking about it. So tikkun olam, Hebrew and Jewish, and it links to this phrase, to heal a fractured world, to heal a fractured world. So like Muhammad saw fractured divisions, which were not good. They were inhumane, and he wanted to repair that. And as a Christian, I'm inspired by that because that's how I see Jesus as well, the life and legacy of Jesus. So that's a very condensed version of my framing of Muhammad's worldview and his approach.
Okay, so can you please tell us about, for example, the first encounter of Christians and Muslims and how this experience affected your story, your book?
So, my new book is called People of the Book, Prophet Muhammad's Encounters with Christians. So this entire book is a biography basically of Muhammad's life, but told through the prism of his encounters with Christians, which date back to when he was a boy. But when we talk about the first encounter of Christians and Muslims, I think most scholars would point to 615, the year of the first Hijrah, right? So to frame this here, Prophet Muhammad and his believers community were being persecuted, and the persecution became so severe that Muhammad was really concerned for the well-being of his people and his movement. So he encourages them to pick up all of their belongings, march across modern-day Saudi Arabia to the Red Sea, get on some boats there, cross the Red Sea, as Moses did generations before, and ultimately to be refugees. They were asylum seekers, and they sought asylum in the Christian kingdom of Abyssinia. And King Ibn Abjar, right? So a 7th century Christian ruler in modern day Ethiopia, brought the Muslims in. And long story short, he literally defends the Christians in the presence defends the Muslims in the presence of the Quraysh, which were the main enemies of the Muslims. Mm-hmm. So he actively defended these people. And this is something that, when you see injustice, you should engage in actively defending other people. This is part of my own journey. I grew up in arguably the age of Islamophobia in the United States. I was 15 when 9/11 happened. I mean, think about that's pretty young. Easily, the mind is a very mushy thing at 15. It's easily kind of manipulated. And I fell into that trap for a little bit. And then I got out of it through seeking knowledge. Mm-hmm.
And can you please tell us about the components of the scale? So, step by step, and how it applies to Prophet Muhammad.
So, yes, let's break it down. Let's start with anti-racism. Mm-hmm. This is one. So, Prophet Muhammad moved beyond this idea of being not racist, right? So, being not racist is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But to be anti-racist is something that is more active, right? It requires something more solution-oriented things. Mm-hmm. So Prophet Muhammad, Bilal is a great case in point. One of his companions, he freed Bilal literally from slavery, shackles. He was biracial, and he had ancestors in Ethiopia, Abyssinia. So he was darker, and he was enslaved, and he was being mistreated. Muhammad frees him. But most importantly, Muhammad was creating things in society that enabled Bilal to be really free, to be truly free, like to maximize his potential. So we refer to this as like social mobility, like Bilal was not only free, but he had the resources in the capital to like be awesome. Mm-hmm. We have religious pluralism, which I distinguish from religious tolerance. Mm-hmm. There's a Harvard University professor named Diana Eck of the Pluralism Project, and Eck defines pluralism as the energetic engagement with religious diversity. Mm-hmm. So it's not just tolerating people. Like that's a good thing too. Like being not racist is a good thing, but like tolerance is not enough. When you tolerate a behavior of a friend or a family member, like there's something a little standoffish, like you're not really grappling with it. So the pluralism pushes us to engage at a deeper level. And Prophet Muhammad engaged again with the Christians of Najran this time, the Christians of Najran in the year 630. And Muhammad invited them to his mosque. So Najran is in southern Saudi Arabia today, and Medina is way up. So they traveled all the way there. Muhammad hosts them for 3 days, and they spend time together, and they engage in a interfaith dialogue. And Muhammad even allows the Christians of Najran to pray in his mosque, which is really an extraordinary act. The civic nation concept, right? So I distinguish a civic nation from an ethnic or a racial nation. A ethnic or racial nation, like your sense of belonging to that nation is determined essentially the minute you were born. And if you don't have the right DNA, you're out. That's not a good thing. That's like Nazism and Hitler ideas of racial superiority. Right. So a civic nation does not necessarily construct the nation around these rigid identity categories linked to a specific ethnicity or religion or race. What makes one belong to a civic nation is the law, the principles that are laid out that are largely democratic. So freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, the right to own private property, freedom of speech, the right to participate in an electoral system. So Muhammad did this in 622 with the Constitution of Medina, which was a confederation of tribes, Muslims, pagans, and Jews coming together, agreeing to principles, and basically being a republic, being a federation. So
Prophet Muhammad provided all these freedoms that we see in Bill of Rights today.
Yes. So this is, and I write about this in the book, Muhammad did this in 622. The quote founding fathers of this country did it, in 1776-ish. Right. So a similar framework, two different parts of the world with people who are running these nations as really two separate religions, different races, different ethnicities, etc., but a same vision of the world. That's powerful, right? So like when people say, oh, Islam is this and Prophet Muhammad is this, you can just go to a very simple example, like the Constitution of Medina. Go to that Constitution, read it, and tell me if it doesn't align with American values. It does.
Sir, I forgot to introduce my students. So Anthony Vargas, and we have Suheila, and we have Anisha. So they also want to contribute to the interview. Who wants to start first, guys?
I think I'll start.
Okay, Anthony, go on, please.
Dr. Considine, it's definitely a pleasure to have you here, first of all.
Greetings.
Mr. Vatanda showed us an interview that you held, and the moment you said Italian Irish Catholic who was presented to Muhammad, and immediately I'm coming back to myself, and it's almost like a reflection. I came to this school 3 years ago as an Irish Italian Catholic, and you come from this background that the American society also has you believing. Naturally, after 9/11, there are certain biases that we're just not aware of. You have this blanket of, innocence, I guess, where we're just not aware of the other diverse populations of the world. And so you have this school, Pioneer Academy, that has Kazakhstan, China, the Middle East, and I come from an American school system that doesn't even tell me about half these countries. So I really appreciate you coming with us to show the Christian view of Muhammad, because as a person who was really the only Italian Irish person in Pioneer Academy, I felt extremely left out. I felt like the minority, and I was like, wow, this is like so uncomfortable. But my brothers and sisters of Islam have felt that way. And so I really made it a statement for myself just to present to my family and friends outside of my school to just present them Islam, not as my religion, because I'm a Christian. I actually left the Catholic faith to go to Christianity, which I don't believe is much different, but I believe it's more of a preference. And so I would ask you if you could develop your Catholic faith a little more to us, some of the differences in Catholicism and Christianity, if you do see any difference at all, just fundamental beliefs in the Bible. I would definitely appreciate that view from you, because I know you have an amazing perspective.
That's interesting. So thank you, Anthony, by the way. Yeah, my book and my views it's a Christian perspective, like I think my views for other Christians may not be acceptable. Like I don't, my words on Muhammad upset even some Christians, which is something that is difficult to balance. Getting criticism from your own tribe, if I could put it that way. Now, Catholicism and Christianity, interesting use of terms there too, as if they're two separate things. Isn't Catholicism's really like a sect of Christianity? And what sect do we begin with when we talk about Christianity? I mean, this is a faith that is extremely diverse. Even when you talk about Catholicism, like being an Irish Catholic in Boston, Irish Italian Catholic in Boston, and practicing my faith there is much different than it is practicing here in Houston, which is where I am. Right. So like even within the umbrella of Catholic American, you're going to have different types of experiences, which lead to different types of theologies. But I'll give you, I suppose, a real life example. Just recently, I was in Lake Worth, Florida, which is right outside of Miami-ish, about an hour and a half from Miami. And we were in a congregational church. So that's a sect of Protestantism. And I walked into the sacred space and I said, this is very, very much like the Catholic tradition. And I brought my hosts into this space and I was giving them a tour, but through the prism of a Catholic in a Congregationalist church, because the framework was all similar. And I'm like, this is how we would do it if this was a church. But when we got to the stage, there was a band set up. So I do like music when I worship, but it has to be a certain type of music and worship. Some of the, like that Congregational church I mentioned, like they have more of like a concert. Like, so it feels like you're more at like not more like you're at a concert, but there's more of a concert component. And I like a little bit more meditation. Like I love music, but not when I'm praying, not when I'm worshiping, So that's a personal preference. The other thing I think is big is like the saints. Like I love the saints. Saints mean a lot to me. They always have, for religious and cultural reasons as well. Being from Boston, it's St. Anthony. And you don't really see much of that in Protestant churches, So I suppose that an area of controversy would be what a Protestant might look at as idol worshiping among Catholics. So like when you go into a Catholic church, like we have statues of saints, you go up to the saint, you say a prayer to the saint, you light a candle, you spend time there. Protestants might think that intercession is not pure monotheism, that you're going through another source. So I could go on, but those are some big ideas, I think.
Okay, Suhaila, thank you so much, Anthony, for your question. Suhaila, you want to go on with your question?
Okay, so I wanted to ask about how in chapter 5 you talk about women's rights, and I was interested in what you personally felt about the hijab ban in France.
Oh, okay. So it's not right. It's definitely not right to ban an article of clothing like that. It gets quite personal when you start talking about like what people can do with their own body, to have a government say and dictate what you can and cannot wear. I mean, that gets to basic fundamental human rights. So I really talk about it as a human rights issue in the book. And I believe I make a parallel to other scenarios around the world where women are, in some cases, forced, but maybe coerced into wearing them. And I don't believe in that either. Right? So you have social pressure on a woman. You have to wear it. And then you have a government like what we see or what we have seen recently in France that is saying you can't wear it. Those are kind of two sides of the same coin, like two extremes that don't really reflect reality. Ultimately getting to why do women seek to wear this? I suppose the French have this kind of fear that like all of these women are like oppressed, that they're like being forced to wear these things. And if you look at reality, that article of clothing means something different to every woman, right? And you have to hear those stories. Those are the stories that matter. Getting real perspectives from individuals who are, integrated into French society, and they do all these things, and they're active citizens, they're good citizens, they believe in France. But you're telling those people that they can't wear an article of clothing. It doesn't make any sense. So we need to enhance the dialogue and get these stories of actual women out there.
Suhaila, do you have another question?
Yes. My last question is, what do you think you learned the most when you were writing your book, or what surprised you the most when you were researching about Islam?
Good question. It was so long ago. I wrote it in I think 2019, or it's not that long ago, but the most surprising, I think it's probably captured at the end of the book when I'm talking about similarities between Jesus and Muhammad. Yeah, I think that was like the fact that was included in the conclusion that basically suggests that was like the last big idea I had when I was writing it. So yeah. And that goes back to Tikkun Olam, what I was talking about earlier, to heal a fractured world. That's what they were doing in very, very similar ways, though different, but very similar.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're
Dr.
welcome.
Craig, Jesus says, love your enemy And the Surah of Fusilet in Quran, God says, be nice to your enemy. It's very similar.
It is very similar.
Yeah.
And I'll say this as a Christian,
Right.
being a good Christian is one of the hardest things. And similar, to be a good Muslim is a very hard thing. To love your enemies.
Yeah. The similar concept.
Not easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not easy to do.
Right. Anissa, what is your question to Professor Craig?
Thank you again for taking the time to answer our questions today. So I love the idea of Iowa being implemented as a tool for a better understanding of Islam and religions in general. I also believe that there is a lack of Iowa being expressed, especially in this generation. So with your experience and point of view, what is the best way to fix racial ignorance that people may have on religions today? And, similar to what Suhaila said about the ban on the hijabs in France.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the term ignorance. That's an important term. Much of ignorance is rooted in a couple things, like unfamiliarity with people, with ideas. This unfamiliarity or this lack of knowledge can also be driven by fear, which is a different beast in its own right. And then also kind of apathy. Sometimes people don't seek to learn. People don't seek out knowledge. So what's the way to combat those things? I would say it's DEUCE, which is, you see here. So DEUCE is another acronym that basically puts pluralism into practice. So pluralism, to put it very bluntly to the question, like pluralism is the answer. So how do we do pluralism? We do pluralism by engaging in DEUCE, which is the peace sign, DEUCE as in two. It's a 5-step process. Number 1, dialogue. The dialogue begins usually with food, and the dialogue begins by not talking about religion, talking about humanity first. The education comes once you've developed trust, once you've built rapport between communities. This is when you can start educating about religion and other traditions rooted in one's faith. The understanding is more of like a state of being where, they're friends and you know them on a deeper level because you've actually been able to properly educate one another. The commitment is when two groups or multiple groups come together, having all of this understanding and basically saying, we're going to commit ourselves to a set of principles. And this can often lead to joint projects working together. So we commit to these principles. Let's put these principles into action. Let's go do something out there in society together. And that's where the engagement comes in, the E. That's when you're in the public sphere and like Christians and Muslims are actually working together on the same project, helping another group of people that need assistance and basically showing the world that this is not only a possibility, Christian-Muslim coexistence, it's a reality for people.
Mm-hmm.
So DEUCE works, I think.
Right. Professor Considine, thank you so much for your time for us. It's really a privilege for us to have you in our podcast today. So
my honor.
Yeah, you guys have any other question for Dr. Craig? No, right? Okay, thank you so much for your time again, sir.
And feel free to email me if students want to continue a conversation.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, sir.
God bless you all. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.